Hello, everyone. Welcome to our lecture today. I am so happy to be here with you. And we are going to be talking about the immortal body or the resurrection body today. So I will be lecturing here live on YouTube, Rumble, and Facebook, actually. But I'll just be taking questions after the show from my members. So if you want to have your question read and answered, then go ahead and sign up there now with the link in the tab. And the discussion will continue after on my private platform. So keep that in mind as you go. If you have any questions forming, that's the place where you want to put them in. Okay, so we are going to be getting into what the immortal body is, or what the resurrection body is exactly. And we're going to look at it throughout the different cultures of the world and the different time periods in which it was spoken about and mystery teachings. And we're going to look at it as not only a phenomenon of the human being, but also of the planet itself. So the planet also resurrects or enters into an etheric form. It's not just the human body that can have a glorified etheric body that the soul basically enters into. Also, the planet is moving into an etheric glorified form as well. And in anthroposophy, we call that New Jupiter. So we're going to get deep into the mysteries today on a planetary level and parallel it with the human developmental aspect, because those two things go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. And of course, I'm going to be pulling from the Eastern mysteries of resurrection and where they exist there. But I'm also going to be pulling in a lot of the Western mysteries, really centered in anthroposophy or the Steiner work. All right, so let's look at the idea of resurrection or ascension, or the transference of one's I or soul entity into an etheric form, first as basically a planetary operation or part of the planet's life. So often when we talk about this, it's really about, we think about Jesus, who performed this feat with Christ, the being within him. We think about that. Or we think about sort of these different Taoist or Hindu masters that have achieved it, and they built this diamond body, this higher body, and they were able to occupy that as basically a physical body after death. But often what's left behind is the planetary reality of ascension, or that the planet itself is mirroring human development, and is another expression of human development, which is that the planet itself is right now developing and building an etheric body. And as mentioned in anthroposophy, this is called New Jupiter. And Jupiter is actually just a higher aspect of the Earth that we're creating right now, and that's what the planet represents. And as you'll see later in this lecture, Zeus and Jupiter is associated with Christ. It's associated with the glorified etheric realm and all of that as a deep mystery symbol. So essentially, how the Earth evolves is the same way as the human being. So a human being begins as an astral form, and then it materializes through a process of what's called involution. And then once it materializes, you get your individuality or your I, your unique soul essence, your spark of God. And then from that position, you have to, ascend or resurrect out of the physical form through transubstantiation into the etheric and astral form again. So really, you're looking at an arc. And this is very clear in the Eastern mysteries and theosophy and anthroposophy. Every aspect of the mystery schools will acknowledge this arc of human and planetary development. You begin as an astral form, you materialize as an individual into a material body, which is where we are right now, and then you spiritualize through attuning with Christ, who is the solar being, right, into a higher form, into an etheric form, and then eventually there will be another resurrection period into even an astral form. And so this is the structure. And every single mystery tradition, no matter whether it's Eastern, no matter it's Western, honors this structure and observes this structure, and every initiation and every mystery is really around how humanity can navigate through this arc of descension into matter and ascension out of matter. So that's the secret. And really, this is the lesson of our time. I mean, I cannot think of a more important spiritual topic of study than resurrection. There literally isn't one. You can get lost in all of the cockles and corners of occult teachings. But if we're not understanding how to spiritualize our form out of matter back into the spirit plane, then we're not really achieving anything. We're just doing busy work. We're just getting caught up in sort of the Luciferic delusion of, mind, right? So this is the teaching of the time. And this is what we really have to understand. And there isn't really, every other teaching is really secondary to this, if that makes sense. So let's look at the teaching of resurrection and the resurrection body in the East. So this is Hinduism, Taoism, Tibetan mysticism, all of that. Let's just take the Eastern traditions and look at how they classified the immortal body, what they called it, and maybe a little bit about how they believed that they could create it. So in Taoism, the resurrection body or the immortal body is called the diamond body. And it was described as hard and crystalline, which is really fascinating because in the Western mysteries, especially in anthroposophy, we don't actually reach the glorified state or the ascended state from our planetary sphere until we actually master the mineral kingdom. And that is basically like mastering the crystal world, right? And so describing the Taoists describing the immortal body as crystalline, as a diamond, as hard, is absolutely correct. And it is also carried on in the Western mysteries, even the idea of the philosopher's stone. Here again, we're talking about really also the glorifying of the mineral kingdom and the transformation of the mineral world, which is, in order to resurrect, you have to actually transcend the material, which is represented often in the occult world as crystals. So very fascinating that Taoism calls it the diamond body and the hard crystal body, because it really shows that even deep in these traditions that are, many of them thousands of years older than Christianity, there was the knowledge that in order to glorify your etheric body and get out of the material world or the mineral aspect of the self, you have to transcend it. And so that's represented in the crystalline form. That's the transcendence of the material world. They were also called cloud walkers, which was kind of like another term for masters. So the idea of like Luke Skywalker, right? It's kind of like Luke Cloud Walker. That's very Taoist. That's very much part of what that would have been spoken like in that tradition. And also, in the South American tradition, you have the idea of the sky people and the cloud people, which really was the idea of not aliens, but really spiritual masters or angels, the beings that would essentially could transcend matter, but were still able to sink into it. They were believed to be walking in the clouds. And so they were called cloud walkers, sky people, and celestial people, because as we'll see later, Paul in the Bible calls the resurrection body or the glorified body the celestial body. And so again, this isn't like aliens or something. This is literally what the ancients and even even the Western adepts would call the glorified etheric body. The glorified etheric body is associated with the stars, with the sky, and with the heavens, because that is where that part of the human being reaches to when it is achieved. And so the cloud walkers and those that had achieved the diamond body in the Taoist tradition were believed to be beyond death. They no longer were subject to death. They were no longer subject to having to go through a certain death process. They were beyond that. They could kind of walk out of their body and into this glorified etheric body and exist as a human if they wanted to in a material way, or they could disappear into the etheric plane. And so this is the idea of being beyond death. It no longer is an involuntary process. Death is no longer an involuntary experience and process to the master, or even to very high adepts. The death process becomes easier and easier. You die consciously. And so the idea is that you're beyond death. You're living in the spiritual world with an indestructible spiritual body, a body that's been transformed by your efforts. And basically in Taoism, and this is pretty much the same across the board, though once you get the incarnation of Christ, in the Western tradition, a lot of the Eastern traditions evolve in the Western tradition to include Christ. So in the Eastern traditions, though, especially in Taoism, how you are to build your glorified etheric body is basically through internal alchemy. So through harmonizing your thoughts and feelings. So a lot of it is about creating a sense of control and harmony within the emotional body, within the astral body, within the higher sheaths. And that harmonization allows energy to pour into building your glorified etheric body. It's not getting burnt up or used up in senseless material pursuits, basically. And that goes towards building up your eternal body. The other tradition, obviously, where the immortal body is acknowledged, is Hinduism. And there's lots and lots of different words that basically describe this process. One is called the Vajra body, and that's Vajra, or Vajra-diha. There's also the Dorlus, or the Dharmakaya, or the adamantine body. There's lots of sort of different scriptures that refer to the process, oftentimes in metaphor and story, where different gods and goddesses will basically play out different alchemical reactions in the creation of the body. That's very, very common in Hinduism. And in the Hindu tradition is also where we get the idea that you can make great leaps in developing your immortal body when you meditate in darkness. And so obviously this is part of the Egyptian tradition too. A lot of Egyptian initiation rites like use darkness in the same way that the Hindus do. But in esoteric Hinduism, the idea is that one of the ways to quickly build the resurrection body was to basically do sensory deprivation, which is what, you know, when the monks are talking about this, or the yogis are talking about this, and it's, you know, 4,000 years ago, they're not talking about, like, when they're describing like darkness meditation, we could see that today as like sensory deprivation, where you are no longer experiencing the hyperstimulation of the material world, your busy life, and you're able to just completely turn inward, and that is an accelerant. Obviously, a more reasonable approach to this is to just cut out, obviously, the distractions in your life, to live with purpose, and to not always be looking to, you know, get lost in unconscious behavior. So it was believed that, I mean, and I've seen some pretty crazy things around this topic that say you can develop it in a few days. Definitely not. The resurrection body is something you develop in many different lives. It's not, you're not going to go to a darkness retreat and develop it in an afternoon or a weekend. That's just not how this works. So one of the fascinating things I found in the Hindu scriptures about the resurrection body was a certain meditation that these yogis would do in order to consciously build and construct the resurrection body, which was they would basically imagine their physical body, like their earthly physical body, as gold, right? And then they would see the four corners of their body, so here and then on the ground, up. If you imagine someone in lotus position, like the four corners of the body, they would then imagine those as lightning bolts, actually. And that's why also the Vajra is sometimes referred to as a lightning bolt. And it gets a little crazy, like with some people trying to say that it's a technology and not an actual spiritual body, but that's another video. But so they would basically envision themselves like their physical matter turning into gold or as solid gold, which has incredible symbology because gold is the metal of the sun. So you're basically acknowledging yourself as the sun. The sun is also the Christ being, right? And much later, obviously, the Christ being enters into Jesus and the resurrection is performed, right? So this idea of gold and the sun is absolutely a staple. Also, lightning bolts is stable, is in pretty much every tradition. You see the same things appearing again and again. And lightning bolts is one, Jupiter is another, which we'll get into near the end. And also gold and the sun. And these are actually called the sun mysteries. So that was how in ancient Hinduism, it was said to be able to focus yourself on the process of glorifying the etheric body. Okay, and we say glorified etheric body because what the immortal body is, or the resurrection body is it's your etheric body, right? That you build or you glorify through the Christ impulse that actually creates a higher body, so that when you either die consciously, pass away, however you do that in your life, you enter into this glorified etheric body that you've built life after life. So if you don't consciously build the body through right living and through Christ within the heart center, then when you pass away, your death process is like an involuntary thing that you go through. And you don't really have any control or any glorified body to enter into. So that's why it's called the glorified body, is because you're basically building it. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. So, and then in Vedanta, the etheric body, the glorified etheric body, is called the superconductive body. So here is that idea of electricity or the lightning bolt, the thunderbolt coming in, Jupiter's thunderbolt, right? Coming in again. Because electricity, if you remember my electric apocalypse video, is the medium of the etheric plane. Right. And so even back before electricity was technically discovered, people were calling the glorified etheric body the superconductive body. They also called it the radiant body, and like the Taoists, the indestructible body, because once you essentially build this higher body, there is no earthly thing that can destroy it. There is no process of the material world like death that can destroy it. And so this is the idea also of eternal life in the Bible. The eternal life is through building your glorified etheric body, which is the resurrection body. It's also called the bliss body because this is describing when you begin to take this process very seriously, and you build that etheric body, that your etheric body consciously with the forces of love, and right living, you basically will also receive waves of love back to you. Your glorified etheric body will radiate this back to you because it's literally a body that you can't see. It's within your body, but it will basically radiate back to you all that you've invested into it, all that you've created into it. So it's associated with bliss, it's associated with peace, with calm, all of that. And of course, in the yogic traditions and Taoist traditions, they really saw that when you developed this higher body, during the process, but also once you'd achieved it, you would have these incredible powers. So this is where you hear these really insane stories of like a spiritual teacher being able to bilocate, or a spiritual master being able to bilocate. Like someone saying, oh my gosh, I saw this one person in this place, and then he was also giving a lecture in this other place. Okay, well, that's letting you know that that they've developed this body. Okay, and this is also true with the idea of the saints. So the saints in esoteric Christianity is the same thing as like the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas in the Eastern system. It's the same thing as the spiritual masters in the New Age. So they're all referring to somebody who has built this body to varying different degrees of initiation, because it's not just like you build the body, right? And now that's done. The whole process is an initiation, and there's many different aspects to it that, we're not going to get into that today, but just know that we're scratching the surface of a process that's much more much more nuanced than, we can get to on the surface. So when this body is built, you have incredible powers. And in the Hindu tradition, these are called Siddhis, Siddhis. And they're just called psychic powers in the Western traditions. But you can basically, they have one that's called, fast walking, which is like you basically can control the air element in such a way where you become lighter and you can move fast and the air pushes you along, so you can travel great distances in very little time. You can levitate. So you can actually learn to levitate and essentially fly. And you can also produce fire. You can have psychic powers. But it's really important to know that, because a lot of students have gotten caught up with this idea of, being able to levitate or psychic powers where you can control people, because you can also develop yourself to a certain degree where you can have some power to burn, and you can develop the ability to influence people who have less concentration power than you, who on a mundane level are less developed than you, right? And so the real power, and this is something that isn't mentioned a lot, but the real power actually isn't in gaining psychic abilities or levitation or like being able to create fire from your body. The real power is actually the renunciation of those Siddhis, and is actually complete service to humanity. And that's what creates an accelerant in your spiritual nature. So it's funny how when you do that, they come back even stronger in your next life. So spiritual development and the gaining of the immortal body, it's not about, feeling the sheer power of being able to, lord over the material plane or something like that. It's really about your, at the end of the day, it's really about your relationship with God and actually leaving the material plane ultimately, or being in the material plane in a spiritual way, but while really being rooted in a higher one. So in other words, to develop these Siddhis for your own entertainment or to control other people will actually only lock you deeper into the material existence, and it will deteriorate you at a very fast rate. And so it's best to completely align these siddhis with Christ within you, with God, and even that's what the renunciation of them is to completely give them to God and have them only be used via God through you. And that's the difference, and that's why people fall from grace and things like that, is that the moment they get the taste of the powers that come through this body, they immediately become selfish. And so you renounce these bodies into the arms of God and of Christ, and you have them, but you only use them, through the highest forces possible. And that's what gets you to the next level of your process. So you never use your powers in a flamboyant way. You never become a show-off. You never try to manipulate people with your spiritual abilities. These are sick things to do, and they will hurt you and they'll hurt other people. There are many people who have these powers and they would never display them. They wouldn't speak about them as though they do have them, because the moment you begin to do that is the moment it all falls apart. And so when you do get to a higher level of this advancement, there is very strict spiritual laws about how you can advance further, basically. And this is why in both Eastern and Western traditions, there are outlets for this where this can be developed privately and is developed privately, and so on and so forth. So other names for the spiritual body in different traditions is that in Sufism, it's actually called the supra-celestial body. Now that's a translation, right, into English. And it's also called the most sacred body. And in Egypt, it's called the vehicle of immortality. So very, very similar to the Hindu tradition and the Taoist tradition. It's also called the Atum vehicle, Atum vehicle. In the Egyptian mysteries, it's also called the Ak, or the AKH, and the Karast, and that's Karast. So here again, we're seeing that no matter the tradition, the rite of resurrection exists. Of course, it becomes central at the time of Christianity, and for a very good reason, but it exists in every tradition. And it's funny because the moment somebody starts talking about resurrection and Jesus and the Christ, I mean, people start to get really uncomfortable because they automatically think of dogmatic representations of resurrection and Jesus, which have nothing to do with the esoteric principle. And I cannot say that enough. Every spiritual tradition has basically a dogmatic version of it that's not real. And the student needs to work hard many times to connect with the real impulse behind the religion, the original pure form of it. Okay. In the Mithraic tradition, it's just called the perfect body. So the perfected body. And this is very, again, it's very similar to all the traditions before and after it. So in the Western terminology and the Western practice, we see the terms become a lot more scientific, a lot more direct. And so in the Western tradition, you'll hear it be called the glorified etheric body. It's actually describing what it is. And glorified means that Christ has entered into it and transformed it. And Christ, of course, is the highest solar spirit, or the highest solar angel, right? The highest solar angelic being that we can perceive. So it's also called the resurrection body. And the mysteries in the West are under the doctrine of resurrection. and we see the real story of the resurrection body being played out in Jesus's life and in the resurrection doctrine in esoteric Christianity. We see it kind of reach a peak and crystallize and get to a new level that had not been possible on the planet before Christ. So the idea of building the immortal body before Christ is one thing, and it is another thing after Christ. And this is something we have to realize in occult science, is that the world is not the same before and after Christ. So what is older is not necessarily truer, and what the paradigms we're using now may not be the same in 2,000 years or 1,000 years. This is something that we have to understand about occult science, right? Because there's so much in the New Age or wherever that's like, the older the tradition, the more pure it is. This is not the case. We have a different consciousness then. The earth is in a different condition then. So we always have to be factoring in where we are in time correctly. Nothing stays true forever. There's always an evolution, and genuine spiritual understanding will acknowledge that and factor it in properly without ego. So another word, especially in anthroposophy, and you can find some really good excerpts on this if you go to, anthroposophy.eu, or if you go to the anthroposophical archives, the Rudolf Steiner archives. They also call it the cleansed phantom or the phantom. Now, this is an interesting word because at the turn of the century and before, the etheric body was basically called the phantom self or the phantom. And this was because when a human being passed away, especially before cremation, what happened was a lot of the times the phantom would hang around the body, or the etheric body would stay connected to the body. And so clairvoyants or people would pass a graveyard and they would see these kind of ghastly, decaying forms that were basically standing on top of people's graves. Sometimes they're also called a wraith, W-R-A-I-T-H. And the idea is that the etheric form on some people would not detach from the body right away, and it would just sort of hang around. And so people would see these forms hovering around the dead body because they were still united, and so they would call them phantoms. And then eventually phantoms got conflated with ghosts and things like that. But initially, the term referred to basically the etheric body that was going through the process of death that could be seen around the body. And then once cremation happened, this allowed the phantom to basically separate from the physical body much easier upon death. And that was a great help. It was a great help for many people. So you will find it being called the phantom, the cleansed phantom, the resurrection body. You'll hear it being called more in the New Age scene, referring to Eastern teachings as the rainbow body. Now, this is because essentially, when the etheric body is constructed properly through, your work, a rainbow or certain rays of light of the rainbow are said to be emitted upon death, and the body appears to clairvoyance as basically just being an iridescent rainbow form. And even when you go through the process of death and rebirth, like if you were to go through certain initiatory rites that would practice building the body and practice the process of entering into it, because that was the deepest level of mystery traditions, was basically to practice doing this, right? That when people would begin to do this, they would just be surrounded by rainbows, like a liquid rainbow light, because those are the 7 rays of creation. And in the etheric body, there is the 7 chakras. And so you see the 7 rays permeating and radiating, and you'd see that in the initiations or in the practices that these mystery schools would do when you'd enter your astral body to pass into your glorified etheric or see the condition of it. You would see these rainbows. And when people would sometimes see these masters who had entered their glorified etheric body, they would see rainbow colors around them sometimes. But oftentimes they would see the rainbow spectrum just compressed into white light, which is the reality of the White Lodge, the Great White Brotherhood. This is just the brothers who have built the glorified body, right? And that have the 7 rays as one within them. So it's also called, obviously, the body of light in the New Age, like the light body. I'm building my light body. This is just the glorified etheric body. This is a resurrection body. That's what it is. So when you basically have an etheric body, it translates in the material world as being basically light. That's what it's like when you're projecting downwards from the etheric into the physical, on a certain level, if you're staying at a certain level. And it's also called the solar body. And this again is getting into the reality that the mysteries of resurrection are called the sun mysteries. And the initiate that bears the Christ is the bearer of the sun, and they are considered son of God. So the highest stage is basically to be a Christ bearer, right? Which was Jesus. But there's also other stages of building the glorified body that would be like Buddhaship and spiritual mastership and sainthood and bodhisattva and all these different sort of levels of purification of the etheric body in which miraculous things can be done, and there's incredible spiritual talents and all of that. But the mysteries are the sun mysteries. And the initiate who glorifies the etheric body of humanity and brings them into the next phase is the sun bearer or the Christ bearer, who on our planet is Jesus, right? So that is one of the deepest reasons why esoteric Christianity is so powerful, is because it acknowledges that reality, which is really a process within us. It's not really even necessarily about Jesus, right? It's about, this is a process that's now within us, right? That's what it's really about. Okay. And so the real secret with the masters or the saints, again, is that they can enter the material plane. They can affect it. They can appear before you. They can send thoughts into your mind, but they are not bound to it. So they have a kind of power over the mineral kingdom and the material world, but they're not bound to it. Okay. All right. Now, in the Bible, Paul is probably the person who seems to speak about the development of this body quite a bit. And so we're going to get into what Paul says, or St. Paul says, about the building of the resurrection body. And also he does infer that the planet is going through a massive shift as well. So not only are we building our glorified etheric body, right? The planet is also ascending into an etheric form, a glorified etheric form, a resurrected version of itself. And humanity will rise with that. Now, it's unfortunate that this idea has been so watered down and bastardized and oversimplified, but the core reality is there. It's just learning it properly, I would say. So Paul calls the resurrection body the celestial body, okay? And he describes the sort of mass the ability for humanity en masse to create this body alchemically near the end of the Earth's cycle, sort of like the rapture, the merging with the sun, and an external force that will affect humanity and assist them in developing this. This is like the idea of Judgment Day and the reckoning. This is this external force that will assist humanity in this development. And so Paul also mentions two other bodies that will come about in humanity that are not the resurrection body. They're not the celestial body. Okay, this is when the etheric body is not glorified through the will of the human being. Okay, and that is the terrestrial body and the telestial body. Okay, so let's see what Paul says about this. In the resurrection, there will be different kinds of bodies. They will not all be alike. And now he's talking about the resurrection of the earth and the resurrection of humanity. Remember, these two processes are linked, right? The body a man receives will determine his place hereafter. There will be celestial bodies, terrestrial bodies, and telestial bodies. And these bodies will differ as distinctly as do bodies here. Some will gain celestial bodies with all the powers of exaltation and eternal increase. These bodies will shine like the sun, as our Savior does, as described by John. Those who enter the terrestrial kingdom will have terrestrial bodies, and they will not shine like the sun, but they will be more glorious than the bodies of those who receive the telestial glory. So this is describing occult science. This is describing that when you get to the end of a planetary cycle, the life wave carries on, but human consciousness and the essence of human beings is basically continues in life waves according to their own nature. And this happens at the end of every planetary development. And so this is right in the Bible. And in this way, the resurrection body can also be seen as a kind of protection against the eighth sphere or against this descending into a telestial form or lower form as in a denser form. So it's protecting you from second death, the idea of second death. It's also a protection against when the eighth sphere begins to draw down upon humanity and pull humanity into lower and lower kingdoms of life or existence. It is a protection against that as well. So it's a glorification that acts as a protection, which is why it's called the indestructible body, the hard body, the diamond body, the body beyond death, is because it's literally protecting you from that process of second death, where you go back through the eighth sphere to Saturn and have to do it all over again, potentially, if the eye is not developed. And Paul talks about this again, saying that the whole creation groaneth and worketh to wit the redemption of the body. And that's Romans 8:22-3. So again, here we are with the redemption of the body. So the goal is not to like live your life and then go through like an involuntary death process where you have no awareness, no control, and you just like disappear back into the void because nothing's developed that survives death. The goal is to work upon yourself consciously and earnestly to basically build an glorified etheric body in which you can exist in after death. And during this, the death process becomes more and more and more shorter, and it becomes more obvious. You have more control there. So this is why also in mystery school teachings, traditionally, there's so much focus on describing how people die. And the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the focus of in the Eastern traditions why they would meditate on their body decaying, why they would visualize their death. This wasn't some weird suicide thing. It was because the initiate seeks to make their death process basically a rebirth in a new life consciously in a higher body that they construct through their deeds, their thoughts, and their feelings. So the idea of never working upon that in your life, never constructing this conscious body for you to exist in, is making it so your death process is basically involuntary, and you just go through a kind of unconsciousness. You live unconsciously, you die unconsciously. There's never any awakening. Okay, so the death process is very much a teacher for the glorification of the etheric, very much. So in Hermeticism, the immortal body or the resurrection body is called the Soma Athanaton, or the immortal body. In the New Age, it's like called the Ascension body and the light body. But in the New Age, it's funny because many times, you know, there'll be these teachings that try to talk about ascension without Christ or without Jesus, which is going to be an incomplete teaching. So, you know, Christ provides the inner impulse of the Son within humanity, within of the Christ within us. And the physical Son provides the external impulse. So you can't have the ascension body be built without acknowledging the Son in man, without acknowledging the Son initiate, the Son in a human being, which was Christ in Jesus, and the physical Son. You have to acknowledge both to actually understand the process. But today, it's like people think that there's going to be a solar flare, and if they're like a good person, they'll just be absorbed in it or something. And you have to acknowledge this. You have to acknowledge the inner Christ within you for that process to be conscious. Now, that's not to say that if you're a good person, that's not good enough. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. That's not going to be a negative experience for you, but it takes it to a different level when you can acknowledge the bearer of the Son. It takes it to a different level, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so in alchemy, now alchemy is basically a complete and total exploration of resurrection. It is all about building the immortal body and exploring that process, even in the mineral sense, but it really is a veiled discussion about building the resurrection body. So of course you have like a base metal, right, which is the physical earthly matter that is not transformed, that's in its gross, coarse state. And then you have the different processes to transform it into gold. And this is the solar resurrection body. So alchemy is really the secret of transubstantiation of the soul, and even getting into understanding the physical aspect of that and different aspects in which transubstantiation can occur in metals and things like this. But really, really, in its core esoteric reality, it is the teaching of resurrection. Alchemy is the teaching of resurrection, is the teaching of building the body immortal within you. And again, we have this reference to gold. Remember in the Taoist tradition how one of the popular meditations was to visualize your body as gold, all of your physical earthly matter as gold, and then to see lightning bolts shooting into it on the four corners. So here again, we have alchemy taking place thousands of years later that's talking about your physical form turning to gold, because that is the occult process that works upon our subconscious mind to convey a deep spiritual reality. Whether we can describe resurrection in a personal way, in a meaningful way or not, it doesn't matter, because when you have these stories and the right symbols, your subconscious mind will take them on, and they will work upon you until you can grasp it in a more specific way. So the doctrine of resurrection exists in all spiritual traditions, although with a different emphasis, different language sometimes, and it appears differently depending on the era of human development. So again, the building of the immortal body and the idea of resurrection is going to appear a little bit different in the earlier periods of humanity, and it's going to appear even more differently in future periods of humanity when people actually begin to do this en masse in more and more ways, and it becomes normalized and more conscious in a few thousand years. So the discussion around building the immortal body depends on the tradition because of the evolution of consciousness. And the later we go in the Earth's developmental cycle, the closer we get to dematerializing, obviously, the more direct the teaching becomes, right? Okay, so how does a human being build their immortal body? How does this happen? We know what it's called in virtually every tradition. We know some of the techniques and the little tidbits around it now. But how exactly do we build our resurrection body? Well, we build it little by little. We build it thought by thought, feeling by feeling, and through the direction of our will. So we build this body every single day by the way we live our life, through the way we live our life, how we think. Each thought creates an etheric substance in which you will live in the astral. The quality of feeling, each emotion creates an etheric substance in which you will live in the astral. Attuned will. Your will directs your thoughts and emotions to higher or lower levels of experience. And when you unite your will with the divine and you live through that, then your will allow you to act and live in such a way where you're building this higher body. So there is no one great practice in the realistic sense that's going to miraculously build this body. It literally is the day in, day out grind of what are you thinking, right? Are your thoughts constantly building a web of anxiety and depression, and you're most of all unconscious of your thoughts, why you're thinking them? Your thoughts think you. Okay, this is that unconsciousness again. Okay, if you're unconscious, then your death process is also going to be unconscious. There's not going to be any way for you to have the power to begin to die more consciously, or even begin to pass, not even through some kind of death, but just pass into your glorified etheric. There isn't the will. There isn't the knowledge of the self, the knowledge of your own mind. There isn't the emotional intelligence to do that, because all of these basic mundane inner developments, the ability to know your own mind, the ability to know the roots of your emotions, all that transfers into direct spiritual power in the astral plane, right? So this is where the idea of know thyself becomes currency in the astral world and in the world of death, because you're not going to be deluded. You're not going to fall into the maze, really, in the astral world. So you've got to not be at a place where your thoughts think you, where everything is a reaction. You have to meditate, and you've got to see your mind as for all of its patterns. You've got to be able to generate peace and calm, right? And then emotionally, you can't be living in super high highs and super low lows. You've got to be able to bring that willpower to reprogram that, because the out of control mind, the out of control emotional body, that leads to complete confusion in the astral world, right? There's a reason why the astral body is called the desire body, because when we don't overcome our desires and the way in which the material world pulls on us, then the astral world to us upon death becomes basically like a maze. And there isn't a lot of, because the will isn't developed to confront the mind and the emotional body and attune it, then it becomes very difficult upon death. It takes longer to process, and it can be very confusing. Whereas when you get your mind and your emotions into a place where it's calm, it's where it's enlightened, when you pass away, it's a clear, and you're able to enter into that glorified etheric body and actually potentially influence the material world, right? And the other thing that really helps to quicken your development is loving action. So actually taking actions that are loving to other people, helping other people, being in service is like throwing fire on it. You know, if you can live and act from service and from love and be that force in the world, you will accelerate your process exponentially. But it's not a race or anything like that. But just on the topic of like, how do we get into alignment and really begin to feel it and really get into the zone? Those are the things that need to be done. So the glorified etheric body, the immortal body, is created little by little, day by day, through establishing our thoughts, feelings, and our will. We create our immortal resurrection body by aligning our thoughts, feelings, and will with Christ within our heart center. Okay? So it's that Christ essence within the heart center that is the furnace of transformation. It allows physical matter that's within the blood to transform into higher etheric matter. So the heart is actually a furnace, which is why when you see Christ with the idea of the sacred heart, the flaming heart, he's pointing at the literal furnace in your body that builds your glorified resurrection body. Of course he is, because that's what he achieved. So we're going to get into this a little bit when we talk about Rudolf Steiner and the etherization of the blood a little bit later. So essentially, this is also called inner alchemy. Now, this means that how we build the etheric body is basically like drop by drop. everyone. I hope you can still see me. Um, Not sure what happened there. It looks like the lights in my room just started flickering and then we lost connection. So I'm just gonna, can you guys see me? I just want to make sure that I'm back. Okay. Al Qaeda says I'm back. Rowan says I'm back. You know, okay. You can hear me, you can see me. All right, let's go. Let's get back to it. So some weird some weird interference, but it doesn't really matter because we're going to carry on. So we were just talking about how the immortal body is essentially built, which is drop by drop. So again, there isn't like an exercise that you can do that just automatically like creates your immortal body or anything like that. You literally build it drop by drop with like every thought that you think, every emotion that you feel, and through basically being able to use your heart center as really a kind of furnace of Christ energy that basically transforms your being, basically. So through spiritual living and practices, an essence is produced within your spiritual body that is of a higher or lower substance, a refined spiritual matter symbolized by gold, or a lower, coarser matter symbolized by dross. So basically, our body is always producing what would be like these little drops of ether. It's like through our endocrine system, really, but it directly connects with the etheric body. And so every single moment, we're sort of producing these drops, really. And the drops are either golden and producing like this etheric higher body, or they're lower, coarser, heavier like lead, and they just draw us deeper and deeper into basically matter. So if a high enough quality of the refined spiritual matter is produced, then the soul or the I begins to become bound into or drawn upwards into the golden spiritual body, the body immortal, the resurrection body. So the fascinating thing is that, and probably you've experienced this in your life, is that the more that you build up this higher body, the diamond body, right, as the Taoists would say, the more it kind of has like a suction effect on your life. Like it doesn't just rest in the etheric plane and have no interaction with you. It begins to basically create this suction where your life becomes magnified, where also spiritual beings can begin to interface with you much more easier because you have this purified membrane, this purified body in which they can actually work with you through. It's like tender, it's soft, it's flowing, it's beautiful. It's not this coarse, hard thing that's impossible to break through. It's like this beautiful flowing silk that higher beings can very easily enter into. And that's where you get at the level of initiation too, where you have these very high initiates and angelic beings speaking, is because the etheric body is beautiful and it is easy to communicate through as well. And this is where you get the idea of prophets and things like this, ideally. Of course, the demonic entities can get into they'll just go anywhere, but I'm talking about very high spiritual forces. So when that very high spiritual, refined, rarefied substance is created, that is the resurrection body, it actually can have the effect of magnifying your life. And so this is why when people start to live a spiritual life and they begin to purify their physical body, they begin to watch their thoughts and their emotions become more active in the world they're creating. They experience this acceleration because they're building this body. And then that body is now working upon them and it's accelerating it and it's pulling more and more of their essence into that. And so a lot of people can get freaked out because and also sometimes that can create a dark night of the soul because there's this magnification going on where suddenly there's this suction where even the dark stuff is being brought up because the glorified body is creating this pull into it, that it's now pulling out your deepest wounds. And so this is why people say, you know, you have to develop very carefully, very slowly, because you're guaranteed on spiritual development to go through some very dark times as that light shines into your deepest wounds, your deepest traumas, and that comes forward to be transformed into your glorified etheric body. So by no means is it like this easy process. It's hard work. So when the higher rarefied etheric astral essence is generated within the human energy body, it creates this natural suction that draws the consciousness beneath it that is not yet transformed into it. And so there you get this alchemical idea of the furnace and the suction. This is a real thing that happens within your energy body. Thus, we slowly transform ourselves from a physical form to an etheric form through inner processes, through the human mind, through your thoughts, your feelings, and your will. The I, or the soul, eventually exists fully in this higher spiritual body, no longer bound to the earth matter. That's the resurrection body. So I found this exceptional description of basically the etherization of the blood in the Tibetan mysteries. And I thought I'd share that to continue to create that through line of spiritual science that allows us to grasp that these are timeless realities of the human being. This is a spiritual science. It's an occult science, which is why you'll find the same symbols in the East as in the West, and the same things described the same way, is because there's an objective science to this. And it became very obvious to me in the discussion of resurrection, because in the Tibetan mysteries, obviously, just like in the West, physical matter and ether are basically intertwined at the level of the atom, right? It's not, ether is not, it's like a transitional assimilation matter, but it is interpenetrating with the physical. The only way we can really perceive it or work with it is if we ourselves are transformed, right? We'd only be able to see the most physical sort of 3D impression of it. But the etheric world is interpenetrating the physical world, and the astral world is interpenetrating with the etheric world. So they're all interpenetrating essentially in the same space. And so the endocrine system is really the part of our system that is the interface. And then from there, the nervous system, and it gets grosser and grosser, or coarser and coarser from there. But essentially, in the Tibetan mysteries, they have the idea of the tikal, or the thickle, and that's Thikle, thickle. And the thickle are basically these essence drops that are produced. This is very similar also in the New Age to like the idea of the Christos oil or the Christ oil that goes up and down the spine. This exists in the Tibetan mysteries as the thickle, or the tickle. I don't want to act like I can speak that language. So please forgive me if you're, esoteric Hinduism or Tibetanism and I'm saying it wrong. Please forgive me. I'm trying. But basically, it is essence drops. So that's what they call it. And these little essence drops are produced by right living, right? And so another way that you could look at the thickle is like a kind of condensation, like an etheric condensation that is produced from like the quality of your mind, the quality of your life. You produce this etheric condensation that basically becomes your glorified etheric body eventually. And so the higher thickle is called Deng, or Deng, and that's Dhang. And it's produced from the heart center. So this is just exactly like the Etherization of the Blood lectures from Rudolf Steiner. This is also what Blavatsky said about the special channel that moves from the heart to the head. And this is in the Hindu mysticism. It's in everything, the special channel that exists from the heart center to the head. And the basically the blood and the essence is etherized in the heart center through the furnace of Christ fire that is the heart, the chamber of the heart. That then goes up into the head, which is where the astral meets the etheric in our body. So the lower body is where the etheric meets the physical. The upper body is where the astral and the etheric meet. So, so the good fickle, the good essence drops, essence condensation in the Tibetan mysteries is called dang. And so you're looking to create this dang, which comes from the heart center and radiates through the body, through the head, and then eventually, if you are living a pure enough life, it will begin to create condensation and build another body for you. And so that is the mystery. That's the mystery of the fickle and the Tibetan version of the etherization of the blood, essentially. And then there's a lower dross that is produced too. So just like in alchemy, right? If you don't pass your thoughts and your feelings through the heart center, if the heart center is not awakened in you, if it's not attuned by Christ, or at least God the Father, but God is just another word for the Father, the Logos, right? So if it's not attuned by the divine to some degree, you know, you're not going to be producing the dang. You're not going to be producing the Christ essence. You're not going to produce the Christ essence condensation etheric drops, basically. What you're going to be producing is dross, is lead. And you're going to be circulating that lead throughout your whole body. You're only going to be drawn deeper and deeper into matter. It's going to lead to the calcification of your glands, the calcification and the ossification of your body, as Rudolf Steiner would say, the Ahrimanization of your form. And so essentially, no matter what is going to happen, you're going to be circulating this etheric energy in your body, no matter what. And we can either kind of create this etherized, beautiful, golden light that goes into building our resurrection body, in which we can literally exist in after death and even begin to consciously exist in. Or we can basically circulate this lower matter and get heavier and heavier and heavier. And usually that happens through selfishness. So when you're just extremely self-serving and only worried about what you can get, power, fame, money, then you're not creating the good essence drops. You're creating the lead and you're circulating that through your system. So basically, there's a very real component of our thoughts, feelings, and our will that either constructs our resurrection body or does not construct it. And it's all in how we're living our life. And in the Eastern traditions, there's lots of examples from various different, from Hinduism to Taoism to the different kinds of tantras and Buddhism. There's so many examples of masters that were able to create the resurrection body and appear before students. So this is something that sometimes would happen, and there's even different, of course there's many different Western teachers who have done the same thing, where they would appear before their students and basically appear and say, listen, I have built this body. Now, again, I want to differentiate between when Jesus resurrects and does it, he's doing it ceremonially with the Christ being inside of him. So earlier masters are not doing that, right? So this is where you get to different levels of the building of the resurrection body. They're not all the same process. And again, the process before Christ is different than after. But you could still operate and appear and do these magical things. And there's many different accounts of this happening to different people. Okay, so I'm going to read to you what Dr. Pasang Eaton Arya said, and he's a Tibetan medicine practitioner, about the thickle and the etheric drops. So he says, Dang thickle resides in the heart and produces radiance, which shines to all parts of the surface of the body, mainly the face, chest, and forehead. So the Dang is produced in the heart, and it has this radiance that is produced up here. Now, in the Western tradition, we see this portrayed as basically the halo. So when the blood is etherized or the Dang thickle is created in the Tibetan system, that is basically creating this golden halo around the human being. Now, obviously, in a lot of Western art, you see the halo around people who are creating the Dang thickle. They're creating their resurrection body, or they have a resurrection body, and that is portrayed as the aura or as the halo. So the halo is a deep mystery secret to say this person has created a resurrection body. That's what that means. They're in the higher levels of that. Now, just because you have built that body doesn't mean that you're able to do certain things with it. Again, it's a whole process of initiation, even within the building of that body. So the Dang thickle resides in the heart and produces radiance, which shines to all parts of the surface of the body, mainly the face, chest, and forehead, the aura, right? The halo. From this radiance, an aura body or light body is formed and protects the body and mind from negative external energies. This is really important because sometimes people will... So basically, when you have a very strong immortal body that you've built and that you've constructed around you, you become impenetrable to a lot of forces, basically. So you don't really need to do all of these rituals necessarily, or all of these things, because all of these processes are happening within you. So so this is why also when you see in esoteric Christianity, Christ comes and says, like, there's no need to sacrifice animals anymore. There's no need to do all of these intricate pagan rituals. And I mean, you can do what you want, but the need is not there as it was in earlier periods, because all of these processes are now happening potentially within you. And so this is a very deep part of human development, when all these processes happen from within the human being. And so this means that the more advanced you become in this process, you truly have an indestructible body. It becomes very difficult to affect you. Not to say that spiritual teachers or even spiritual masters aren't hurt or challenged. They are, but it becomes harder. This is why it's called the indestructible body, the crystal body, is because technically the stronger that is, the more immune to things you are, which is why you rise sometimes to also be a teacher or helping other people, because you can handle if negative forces begin to bear down on you more and more. Because you've developed to a certain degree, you have a little bit more of a natural defense than someone who may not have that body developed. And so you have to, in other words, you should have that developed to a certain degree in order to not completely collapse under intense psychic pressures, or even not psychic pressures, but just trouble in your life. You should be at a certain point where certain things should be streamlined. Again, it's not about being invincible or anything like that. That's certainly the Christ is, but it's about being able to process things a lot faster, having more of a resilience, having more of what you would call a spiritual immune system. Your resurrection body is like your spiritual immune system, basically. Okay. So From this radiance, an aura or light body is formed and protects the mind and body from negative external energy. So again, it's this natural protection. And Thickle is also called the treasure body and is also related to the creation of life, both procreation and the recreation of our form. So the etherization of the blood, the Thickle, the Christ drops in the spine, this is also very closely related to the essence of creation. That's why some people, when they start to study inner transmutation, can get completely caught up in like the sexual aspect, when really the point is not sex. The point is to build a higher body. So the whole point of understanding the Christos oil or how the energy flows in the system is not really actually about sex or even retention or anything about that. It's not really about that, though we could talk about it. It's really about building your resurrection body. That's why all of that conversation even exists. So that's the point of inner alchemy, is to basically have your system running so smoothly with the etherization process that it builds something greater. It actually glorifies your life is becoming so purified, so glorified by your thoughts and your feelings and your will being aligned with Christ, that now you have so much power that you're actually building your resurrection body. It's not just getting lost and thrown around and destroyed and confusion. It's actually, you're actually a precise creature now, you're a precise being. And so this also goes into the creation of human beings. This energy is also the same energy that creates a baby, creates life. And it's also the same energy that creates your life upon death, that determines the quality of your life upon death, what happens upon death. So they're directly linked. So both a higher and lower etheric substance is produced depending on the activation of the heart center. Higher essence is produced through an awakened heart center and circulated throughout the body and throughout the nadis into the etheric body. So the nadi system or the etheric web connects in with the endocrine system and even the nervous system, and that's the chain of command that goes into the etheric. So the glorified etheric body or immortal body is then produced by the quality of the heart. The essence of the heart, or the essence of the heart. Lower thoughts, feelings, and selfishness produce lower etheric substances with no transcendental qualities and lock us further in the material plane. So, a lot of you probably recognize some of the undercurrents of this conversation in my lecture I did a year ago on the etherization of the blood. And so if this conversation is interesting to you, I highly recommend checking out that lecture, but also checking out Steiner's lecture on the etherization of the blood, because it's basically the same thing. The blood is being etherized in the heart in order to create the resurrection body, which we can live in upon death consciously. So let's get deeper into the Western mysteries. So where the Western mysteries and esoteric Christianity differs from the Eastern mysteries is that in the East, Christ had not yet come. So at the turning point of time or the middle of the Earth's developmental cycle, the sun incarnates in man, and that creates the impulse of ascension or the impulse of spiritualization. So it also turns the core of the Earth, the beginning of it, into a sun. So before that, the Earth is more like a black sun. That's how I see it. And then after crucifixion of the sun being in Christ, in Jesus, then you get the ascension impulse, and the Earth actually turns into a sun and begins expanding and turning into a star. So it's actually a planetary, again, there's a planetary component to this. the planet operated one way before Christ and it operates another way after Christ. So the heart center is the seat of the Christ being within us. And so when that rite is done at Golgotha and the earth changes into a sun and humanity now has the essence of the sun in them, that essence rests within the heart of every single human being. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what color you are, it doesn't matter anything about the nuance of your life. Every single human being has the essence of Christ within them and can work upon themselves through their heart center. The only thing that stops a human being from developing at this point in time is their own will or lack thereof, because the essence is there within every single human being. And it's that essence that creates the furnace in the heart center, the sacred fire. That fire, the fire of the light bearer, is the fire of Christ. It's the solar fire. It's the fire of the sun. Now we see it as fire and talk about it as fire in occult science, but it's actually a being. So that is actually the being of the sun. That is the Christ within our heart center, and that is the way in which matter is transubstantiated. So how the resurrection body is built is through the essence of Christ within your heart center, which manifests as fire, as solar fire. That's what Christ consciousness is. It's solar fire, because Christ is the highest solar being. Okay, so that's where you get the furnace of the sun in the heart. The earth turns into a sun because the earth is anointed by the Christ. It begins its ascent. Humanity begins their ascent once Christ enters the heart center and enters the core, the heart center of the earth as well. So this is the deep beauty in esoteric Christianity, is that it takes, esoteric Christianity includes everything that the Eastern mysteries has. There's nothing in the East that the West does not have, except when you get into the esoteric Christianity, it includes Christ. It includes the last half of human development, and the mystery of Christ comes into full bloom, right? That's why it's important to study it. So what Rudolf Steiner introduces, obviously, is his incredible lectures on the etherization of the blood, which very clearly break down even deeper the idea of the Dang, the idea of that it's really through our blood that the etheric body is also created. So it's through actually the transformation of our own blood through Christ in our heart that actually goes to create this higher body. And so he goes into a lot of detail, and I won't repeat it here because I've already lectured on it. But I think that including the idea of the blood is important as well, because usually when we hear about internal alchemy, it's usually about sexual forces and the retention of sexual forces. And then it also tends to just be about like the endocrine system and stuff. But Rudolf Steiner brings in the blood as well and goes deeper into the process. So I really recommend checking out his work there in regards to building the cleansed phantom in the resurrection body. I'm saying the cleansed phantom because you'll find that in his, because people use different words for the same thing. Okay. So here is Rudolf Steiner on how the initiate, or in this excerpt he calls it the Kila, who can build their resurrection body. Okay. So only that etheric body which has been built up from within is a living body that stays eternally. So built up from within. This is the etheric body of a Kila, or an initiate, and it does not dissolve after death. If you see a modern civilized man die, you may see the etheric body for a while, but then it dissolves. With the initiate, it remains. The renunciation of the spirit world by the initiate consists in the fact that the initiate stays on the astral plane and there makes use of his etheric body. Wow, that's actually a pretty big deal, what he's revealing there. With ordinary human beings, a new etheric body has to be formed at each rebirth. The ability to create a new one is attained in Devachan, or the higher heavens. The etheric body, which the initiate has built from within, will never be lost again. Whereas that which is made by cosmic wisdom from elsewhere indeed dissolves itself again. And that is from GA093. Okay, so what he's saying here is that only the etheric body that has been built up from within an authentic life, a true spiritual life, stays eternally. You have the power with your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions and your right living, your spiritual living, to literally create an etheric body that when you pass away, when your spirit passes into the astral plane, you can actually occupy this etheric sheath. Now, if you live a life of unconsciousness, nothing meaningful is therefore created. If you live a life of dishonesty, if you live a life of selfishness, if you live a life of unconsciousness, you have built nothing of your etheric body. You have glorified none of your etheric body. And so basically when you reincarnate, when you come back down again, you basically get a new plain one. There's nothing there in which to subsist from. And so it's not just like, oh, I want to learn spiritual science for fun, or I want to be like a good person. It's you're literally building something that doesn't die through spiritual life, true, genuine, authentic spiritual life, and even true healing of yourself and true self-realization and aligning that with God. You literally build an immortal body in which you can occupy. That's huge. This is what we should all be focusing on. I mean, the eclipse is interesting, but can you imagine what the world would be like if we all understood this? Really, really understood this? Think about all the spiritual conversations that happen that really probably don't matter if we don't understand this. What is more important than the conscious construction of your resurrection body? This is why this becomes a central doctrine in esoteric Christianity, is because it's literally the most important thing. What is more important in the course of your life, in the course of your soul? So the immortal body is built through the heart center and through the process of the etherization of the blood. Through the heart center, a holy Christ fire is created that alchemically transforms the coarser forces in the lower three centers to a higher rarefied substance. The presence of the Christ being in the human heart is the seat of the solar fire, which allows transubstantiation. In order to consciously build our light body, we must acknowledge the mechanism in which the transformation happens, which is through Christ. So just as we hear this all the time in healing, which is that in order for a wound to heal within your heart, you have to acknowledge the root of it, right? In order to understand why you do this thing that you don't like, that's destructive for you, in order to understand why you feel so terrible sometimes, you have to peel back the layers and look into your very being and say, oh, this is why. It's because of this that's going on within me. I need to heal this, but you have to recognize the root in order to heal it. In order to transform it, you have to see the reality of it within you, right? This is the same thing when it comes to acknowledging Christ within our heart, is that if you don't acknowledge the actual being and process that is allowing you to transubstantiate the matter, you're never going to get deep into that process. So just like we have to be able to see our wounds for what they are, we also have to see the reality of our blessings. And when we have a capacity that's given to us, it's from a higher being. So when we got the ability to have a thinking mind, that was given to us by the angels, right? The ability to transubstantiate our form was given to us by the Christ being. So we can't actually, when you start getting serious about your development, you can't actually not understand where these capacities come from. Just like you can't just solve your emotional and mental pain by not understanding the root of why it's there. You have to understand the root of why our blessings are here too, where they come from. So this is why, with the idea of building the resurrection body, Christ must be in the conversation if it is to be honest. Because there really is no deeply building of the immortal body at this point in time without acknowledging Christ in the heart center, if you seriously want to be involved in it, right? It's like in that Rudolf Steiner lecture where he said to not believe in any kind of supernatural world is a disease. So to be an atheist is a disease. To believe in, to only believe in God the Father is okay. It'll get you it'll get you to a certain place, right? And then to not believe in Christ is also a tragedy as well. So there's different ways in which we can put our mind, where if you just believe in a God, as in like God the Father, God the Logos, that'll get you so far. But to really get into the intricacies and the deep secrets of the cosmos, you have to understand the Christ. There's no way around it. And so this is why when we get into the teachings of resurrection, it's all about the sun initiate. It's all about gold and the sun, and it's all about Christ. And that's for a reason, is because we have to be able to place within our being where this capacity comes from if we want to actually master it and achieve it, right? And so part of that is, again, understanding that like the dogmatic versions of Christianity probably won't teach you this, which shows how far we've come in basically moving away from the true essence of Christianity. So again, it's important that we understand that the dogmatic versions of different faiths tend to rule and often work directly against, as we're going to see a little bit later, the reality of what Christ and even Buddha and these great beings came and gave us, right? So the resurrection mysteries are, again, often found under the moniker of the sun mysteries. We already mentioned that Christ is a sun initiate. So in regards to the sun mysteries, I want to touch on one thing again, which is that part of the construction of our immortal body involves basically two components. One is the internal impulse that is given to us by Christ, okay, and the Master Jesus, through the Master Jesus. So that is how we receive the internal Christ impulse within our heart center. Okay, that's the internal sun that we have, the internal furnace of Christ within us. But there's also an external impulse, which is the physical sun. And so there will come a point later in human development where the sun actually releases an impulse. And that will be the external Christ impulse that falls upon man. And so we basically experience both, and both will lead to a kind of judgment day or a reckoning where basically the body is created or it's not. And there you get into the prophecy of Paul that talks about the celestial, the terrestrial, and the telestial, and the reckoning of the great solar emissions. So There's the external Christ impulse, which is sort of like the emanation of the sun. And by the way, it gets stronger and stronger as time passes, as I've mentioned before, until it begins to have activity. And that helps to catalyze humanity into an etheric state, actually. So there's that internal Christ impulse that comes through the sacrifice of Christ into the earth. And then there's the external impulse, which creates the condition for basically the mass creation of the resurrection body for humanity or not, okay? And there's a book by Prokofiev, Sergei Prokofiev, called "And the Earth Becomes a Sun." I love that title. And he gets into the resurrection in regards to Jesus and Christ like nobody's business. His work around this is literally 100 years ahead. So if you want more specifically on Jesus and the Christ and resurrection, that's where you want to go. I can link that below. So I'm going to read here from a book called The Fourth Mystery, Birth and Death by C.G. Harrison. All right, and now, if you are a member, you know that I've read this to you before, and that I'm a big fan of C.G. Harrison. So very Steinery kind of writing here. So basically, in this book, he has a lot to say about the idea of the eighth sphere, the process of death and rebirth, and he does also talk about the later phases of the Earth's development in which the sun kind of absorbs the Earth, which signifies the lifting of the Earth into an etheric body, or like the new Earth, or like in the New Age, it'd be like a 5D Earth, although it's not really like a 5D Earth, it's just the etheric Earth. And then also the eighth sphere. And so I'm going to read to you what he says. This is from page 83. In the beginning, he starts talking about the year 1666 and that there's a fire in London, and talks about it as being kind of a difficult time. And then he talks about the words of St. Paul here. He says, "Behold, I shew you a mystery. We shall not all die, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye." Behold, I shew you a mystery. We shall not all die, but we shall be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. And wonder if the last trumpet will be made of Birmingham brass and blown by an apparent young woman in a white dress with a pair of goose wings attached to her shoulder blades. If we could only rid ourselves of that idea that St. Paul was not a fool, but a poet and a master of occult science into the bargain, we should not talk like fools ourselves, and perhaps incline to think over his words. He goes on to say, C.G. Harrison goes on to say, "A time will certainly come, sooner perhaps than is generally supposed, when owing to an astronomical catastrophe, the earth will become an incandescent vapor, and every living thing on it suddenly will exchange its material for an etheric body, so suddenly that it will take some time to get used to the difference." Now I'm going to read that last part again. "A time will certainly come, sooner perhaps than is generally supposed, when, owing to an astronomical catastrophe, the earth will become an incandescent vapor. And every living thing on it suddenly exchange its material for an etheric body. Every living thing on it exchange its material for an etheric body so suddenly that it will take some time to get used to the difference. The fact is, a certain number of the redeemed will have rendered themselves by faithful service fit for archangelic functions. As living creatures, they cannot be pure spirit, but must have a body of some kind. And it goes on from there. And this is again on page 83 if you want to take a look at it. And this is C.G. Harrison's The Fourth Mystery. And it's, I find so often that it's these lesser known authors, usually in the anthroposophical stream or in the from the turn of the century, that do such incredible work that nobody really talks about them. So there's an internal stimulus from the Christ that's given to man at the turning point of time, which is the internal sun, right? The internalization of the macrocosmic being, which is Christ in our heart center. And then an external stimulus from the sun near the end of our era, we will also have. So these two phenomenon give a stimulus for humanity to obviously go into the higher Earth, right? This is also new Jupiter. All right, so I'm almost going to close it out here. I've got 2 more sections to go, and then I will be taking questions, although I'm going to just be taking members' questions today. Without the members, I wouldn't be able to lecture like this publicly. So I'm going to hop on to my private platform probably in about half hour or so and just take member questions. So if you want to be part of that, I'm probably going to go for another hour or so there, maybe an hour and a half, just addressing questions. So now's a good time to find that link in the chat and to sign up or join, or if you're watching me on YouTube and you're a member, to head on over there. I'll be playing a little bumper in between, so you can go to the bathroom or whatever. Okay, so one of the things that has happened lately is that there is this idea that like the temple is going to be built and that the temple is a physical building. Okay, this is extreme materialism. The temple in the Bible and in occult science is the building of the glorified etheric body in which the soul or the astral body and the I live. So we're all building the temple in which we are going to live. It's the glorified etheric body. It's not even physical. Okay. So what we have is an absolute mental disease of materialism and literalism, and in the anthroposophical system, harmonic thinking that is literally interpreting occult secrets in the most materialist way that I'd want to laugh at it if it wasn't so dangerous, right? So the temple that we're all building and that's being referred to in the Bible and in spiritual writing is the immortal resurrection body. It's not a physical building, okay? And so when you get into mystery language, the temple is associated with Jerusalem or New Jerusalem, right? Now, New Jerusalem in esoteric science is New Jupiter. So Jupiter is the occult secret word for Jerusalem, because every single development in society can be tied to a planetary influence or happens under a planetary influence. Astrologers know this very obviously, but it's also a part of occult science to see human development in terms of the planetary spheres. And so when the Earth passes from its sort of current condition into fully another etheric condition, it's called Jupiter condition. It's called the new Jupiter. So Earth basically expands into an etheric form and is called Jupiter, New Jupiter. That's also New Jerusalem. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. So the Jupiter body is also resurrection body. Okay, the Jupiter body is basically the light body. And when we build our resurrection body, according to occult science, we're also already building our place in New Jupiter. We're building our place in heaven, basically, as the dogmatic people would say. So when you build your resurrection body, you actually already begin to occupy the Jupiter space, or the space of New Jupiter. And that's why you could also call it the Jupiter body. So Jupiter, the god, is also associated with Zeus, right? And it's also Jesus, right? Jesus, Jesus. It's the same being that leads us to Jupiter, that represents Jupiter, right? So Zeus and Jesus are connected in that way. But when Christ incarnates, he takes on all of the names of those that came before him as a sun king. So Zeus also carries, obviously, the lightning bolt, or his Vajra. This is his immortal body. The lightning bolt is a symbol of the immortal body. So here again, we're getting the lightning bolt symbology with Jupiter, with Zeus. That's the same symbology as in Taoism and in Hinduism. Okay, it's the same symbology. It's the same thing in the Greco-Roman god system, where Jupiter and Zeus has the lightning bolt. Jesus. You know, this doesn't negate Jesus and Christ. This actually strengthens the reality that when a great initiate comes, he takes on all names before him and embodies them, right? This is the reality of the Christ. So Jupiter is the mystery symbol of the new earth. Zeus, Jesus, Jupiter is representing the initiation of the next phase of existence. And the esoteric title of the Sun Initiate, which embodies the path to Jupiter for mankind. So Jupiter and the Sun Initiate, all that kind of stuff is very, very intricately linked, okay? And I wanted to say one more thing about Christ and the resurrection, which is that, and the reason why Christ has to be acknowledged as part of the inner process you have, is because Christ's resurrected body, so the body in which Christ created, is basically also called the new Adam. And this is revealed through anthroposophy. So basically, the resurrected body of the Christ becomes the new Adam in the next cycle of development. So if you know anthroposophy, you understand, and also Edgar Cayce, you understand that Jesus was basically the reincarnation of Adam. And so there's just this idea of having the seed form, the Adam Katamon, and that this has to happen at the beginning of every cycle. We must pass through it. Well, that's given to us by the Christ. So the resurrected body of the Christ is the new Adam of the next cycle, in which we will all incarnate through our heart center and through the body that we build through him. Okay, so that's how that works. And because I can't, because we're already at 2 hours, I'm just going to give you a couple lecture references for that. And that is in GA156, GA090B, GA011, GA161. So there you'll find a lot of resurrection material, Jupiter material, and Christ, and that will be fun to read. So now that we understand that there is an immortal body that we are either building or not all the time, we understand that it has been acknowledged and achieved in different traditions to different degrees. We understand the difference between Jesus and Christ and the building of the basically collective group soul body that we will incarnate into in the future. And so we've really scratched the surface of so many really important esoteric teachings that we really need to take on in order to move forward in our own spiritual development. But let's get into some of the delusions of the age, because sometimes when we contrast the delusion against the truth, it just becomes all the more clear, and we can learn how to apply it in our life a bit better, and learn what, when we know what the upside down is, the inversion, it helps us to know what the right side up thing is. So the delusions of our age are basically around trying to achieve the resurrection body and the experience of that through false means. So this is through the channel of Ahriman or extreme materialism and scientism, or it's through the path of Lucifer, which is unbridled knowledge that leads nowhere, unbridled spiritualization that has no results in the etheric world, getting lost in spiritual delusions over and over again while producing nothing from it. The thought alone is enough. That's Lucifer. So the harmonic delusion is basically that you can achieve a resurrection body through transhumanism. So this is the externalization of the process and the hypermaterialization of it, where you just basically live forever in the material world untransformed, getting heavier and heavier and heavier. So the idea is that you can just, through machines or even through sometimes mixing transhumanism with genetic modification, you can basically live forever. Or you can like upload your consciousness into like the cloud or the cube. Again, this is like the cloud walker thing, right? So they often use the same symbols, the same terminology, and it seems like they have the same desire, but it's just in a completely backwards and opposite way. Like when you hear someone like Elon Musk and he's talking about like, well, we'll just have like infrared or something, like we'll be able to see the infrared spectrum. Who cares? Like, who cares about seeing like more spectrums of color? Like, you want to be able to actually build your resurrection body. And yeah, you can get some Siddhis from that, like some abilities. But like, there's nothing that a machine consciousness is going to do that's going to actually allow you to live for. It's just going to trap you in the material plane so badly that you'll want to die, right? And that transhumanism is the beginning of that. But this lie that you can live forever in a machine world, you can upload your consciousness in a machine. This is trying to satisfy the natural desire for resurrection and for building your glorified body in a way that you have to sacrifice nothing of yourself to do so. You can just get a brain chip. You can just get like, I don't know what it's going to be in the future, but some kind of like machine thing, some kind of microchip inside of you. You can just hook yourself up to like the Borg, and then you'll live forever in the material world, which is the point of immortality, is actually transcending the material world. So this is like this sick satanic thing, and this is what modern Satanism looks like. Satanism, ladies and gentlemen, is not like it used to be in the Middle Ages, where you have like the magician with his staff that worships the Dark Prince. Satanism today is not understanding resurrection. Satanism today is transhumanism. Satanism today is colonizing space. You better believe that. What is colonizing space? You're going to live on Mars or the moon or some other planet forever in the material world? This is a sickness. You don't live forever in the material world at all. Unless you're getting into some very manipulative occult people who are trying to get away from the Earth and its transformation by going to a different planet, maybe avoid that solar flare that turns the Earth into incandescent spiritual matter. Think very, very hard about why you are going to be pushed into certain belief systems that are supposed to be so good for you, like transhumanism and the colonization of space. Why are we sending rockets up into to go to the moon or colonize Mars as the ultimate thing? We should be focusing on actually building our immortal body. None of that matters when you pass away. Do you think like going to the moon in a rocket ship really matters when you're like, I know it's interesting for science and there's a certain level of information that can be gained, but not at the expense of your actual development into a higher form, right? It has to be in its rightful place. And right now, the idea of colonizing different planets, getting off the Earth, is thought to be the continuation of the human light, the continuation of the human soul, because one day the Earth won't be able to support life. So we have to go and we have to create the spaceship and we have to go to Mars. It's just this insane Werner von Braun thing where it's like with that Elon also has, which is like, we're going to take the light of consciousness, which is Christ, by the way, right? And we're going to bring it to Mars, and we're going to bring it to Mars, and we're going to bring it to the moon. This is delusional. Okay, it's resurrection that we stand to create within ourselves. You know, you're not going to escape the process. Okay, so this idea of like having to continue on the spark of light forever in the material world by going to different planets and like turning yourself into a robot to live forever, these are the challenges of our age. So know them. And everybody will have to make their decision whether they're going to fall for it or not, but know that that is absolute garbage. And also know that underneath these things is something much more sinister, and you're not even getting the real story. This is the front story, but there's actually something much deeper on the occult level that's going on, because a lot of things they say are possible are not possible. So there's actually something else going on an occult level that this is the front for. Please be aware of this. The next thing, the next delusion that we have to be careful about, the delusion of our age that directly denies resurrection. And again, resurrection is about you at this point. It's about you transubstantiating yourself into a higher body to live forever in the spiritual plane, as is your destiny. So should you choose it. So the next thing is very common in like the New Age and the spiritual systems that are all about like gnosis. Like if I just have enough knowledge, like if I just have enough self-knowledge, like if I can just know how I work, if I can know what makes me happy, if I can know what makes me sad, if I can know how the universe works, then I can transcend matter. I can transubstantiate matter. It's not enough. Knowledge of the world, knowledge of yourself, knowledge alone cannot transubstantiate your form. You have to attune yourself with Christ through the heart center to create your glorified etheric body. So you actually have to acknowledge the being that's greater than yourself. So the big lie, often in the New Age, certain sections of Gnosticism and certain parts of the spiritual community, is that all you need is knowledge. And with this, and I like to say this almost every time now, people are going to say, oh, I have the real records from Babylon. I have the real records about Jesus. I have the real records from this person. And they're like 3,000 years old, hardly, or 4,000 years old or whatever, maybe at the most, hardly really a compendium of like life there, considering how we've been on the planet for literally millions of years. But there's going to be a lie that these new records have been discovered as well. So all we need to know is the truth. All we need to know is the knowledge, and that's enough to transcend matter. It's not. You have to align with the Christ force in your heart, and that's actually what does the act of transubstantiation. So knowledge can help you. Knowledge can help you organize your being. It can help you clarify. It can help you heal. It can get you so far. But just knowing, and this is Lucifer, just knowing is not enough. You have to have attunement. You have to be attuned. And just knowing something with your mind does not necessarily mean attunement. Attunement comes through your heart center and attuning your heart center with Christ. And the reason why this is not in the earlier teachings is because Christ had not yet come. So the knowledge alone is not enough. Earlier periods, it was almost in a sense easier to slip into the immortal body, or the sort of whatever was there. So the more independent we become, the more individuated we become, the more we have to purify and cleanse the phantom in which to incarnate in it. So I'm going to end it here. Thank you everyone so much for joining me today. Don't forget that I am live also on my private website at least every 2 weeks, where I just take your questions. Thank you so much for all of your support and your viewership today. It means the world to me. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you. Oh, and also sign up for the newsletter, because I will usually shoot a newsletter out right before I lecture, but I'm kind of liking this weekday thing. So probably gonna maybe watch what I'm doing on Thursdays and see if there's something going on. Definitely sign up for my newsletter, and I will shoot one out before I lecture so that you can definitely get it. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to flip over to my membership site and take some questions, but all my love your way.